Did I read right that we're at the antitype, the Cupid antitype?
Yeah,
Antitype of Cupid.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Let me pull out the books. I read a little past that. This is one of the harder books of Lewis to read, and it might be because
It is, yeah.
I haven't read what he's referring to yet. But this is supposed to be
Yeah,
an introduction to it, though, right?
right. So, well, it's sort of a here's why you don't get it book. Here's the things about Spencer's view of the world that are different than yours. So it's focusing in specifically on the things about Spencer's worldview that are different than modernism. I mean, the fact that you've got types and antitypes, like Christians talk about types and antitypes sometimes if you get deep into exegesis, and
Maybe, maybe.
maybe, right? But here he's talking about types and antitypes of the son of a pagan god.
Right.
Right? Like this is within a work of Christian literature. So the types and antitypes of Cupid, as a symbolic, as a literary character, as a semi-divine character, a supernatural character of some sort, and then as symbolism, right? So as in the story, but then also the type and antitype of the symbolism, um, of of Cupid and Venus, right? Because he spends a bunch of time in
Yeah.
this chapter talking about
Venus.
the antitype of Venus.
Okay, so before we get too far into this, I was listening to, have you read the book The Fourth Turning
I
by
haven't, no.
William Strauss and Neil Howe, or yeah, I think Howe is how you say it.
Okay, I
So
haven't, no.
are you familiar with the premise at all?
No.
So it's the idea that there's a there's so much to this. I'm just in the beginning, still trying to put it all together, but there's the idea that there's these cycles in life, 40-year cycle, but 80-year cycle, and each cycle is based off the previous generation's understanding. So you have hero and you have kind of prophet,
Okay.
generational setups. Anyway, I'm still going through it, trying to get a better understanding of it in the only through the first or second. I've read the book before, but I was like sleep reading it. You know how you put a book on at
Yeah,
night.
yeah.
You like you're listening to it, but you're not. So I'm going through it again. But I remember the basic concept, and there's these cycles in life, and every generation goes through these four cycles. This book was written back in '97, I believe, and they basically said, look, you're going to come to this cycle in the 2020s, 2025, where something big is going to happen, and the culture is going to have to make a decision on either extreme war or extreme work, or figure a way out of this particular catastrophe. And they
Okay.
mark catastrophes based off of 40-year cycles, you know, which actually, if you start paying attention, it's like, actually, it's not far off, right? Like you start seeing these catastrophes line up. It's like 40-year, 80-year cycles. Anyway, so I was going through it this morning and listening to it, and he hit something. I think I have it here. I'm going to try and play it for you. And anyway, I just wanted to get your take on it. Let me see if I can find the right spot here. Hold on. So he goes and talks about Jungianism, and so
Yeah.
he's basically building off of Jung. Hold on, I'm trying to find this part for you though.
Dates, you will find that the first birth year of each generation usually lies just a couple of years before the opening or closing
goes.
year of a crisis or awakening. Finally, notice the recurring pattern within each saeculum. The first generation comes of age with an awakening, while the second has an awakening childhood. The third comes of age with a crisis, while the fourth has a crisis childhood. Each of these four locations in history is associated with a generational archetype: prophet, nomad, hero, and artist. Throughout Anglo-American history, with only one exception, the Civil War, when the hero was skipped, these archetypes have always followed each other in the same order. Due to this recurring pattern, America has always had the same generational constellation during every crisis or awakening. That is, the same archetypal lineup entering the 4 phases of life. But what are the archetypes that are so predictably created by their location in history? How do they function? How do they relate to each other? Why do they lie so near the heart of mankind's interaction with history? Answering these questions means journeying back to the ancient doctrine of quaternal temperaments and to the great myths that arose alongside them. In the view of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, certain symbols, aspirations, and behavioral modes, archetypes, are biologically hardwired into mankind. In all eras and cultures, he said, these archetypes have become so deeply embedded in mankind's collective unconscious that no degree of progress, real or imagined, could weaken their grip. Identifying these archetypes by probing dreams and myths, Jung fashioned his theory after the ancient quaternities. His 4 archetypal functions draw energy from the dynamic antagonism between 2 sets of opposites, thinking versus feeling, sensing versus intuiting. When one function dominates the psyche, its opposite is necessarily suppressed as the psyche's shadow. Though archetypes are ordinarily applied only to individual personalities, they can also be extended to generations. Like an individual, a generation is shaped by the nurture it receives in childhood and the challenges it faces coming of age. When it assumes a persona, a generation, like an individual, can choose from only a limited number of possible roles, each prescripted by a societal collective unconscious. Myth is the raw outline of the archetype itself. In any era, mythical archetypes assist people's understanding of who they are and what they should live up to.
Boom. I was like, whoa. Like, we've talked about this before, but I wasn't expecting it to show up on a book on the 4th turning. Right?
Right.
I wasn't expecting that kind of conversation to talk about, societal turns and its flips, and it goes back and there's retelling the same stories over and over again, just in different formats, right? But it's still telling the same story, and it's telling the story based off of the myth that's set before it. And I couldn't help but think about the conversation that you had when we were talking about George Grant, and you said the thing that really messed you up was like, hey, George, somebody asked George Grant if it was true, and he's like, does it matter? Because the important thing is, what does it make you want to be, right? And that's what he's like. There is a certain narrative that is there to define your metaphysic. There's a myth that's there to define your metaphysic, who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do in that moment. And that's what all stories are doing in one way or another, is defining your metaphysic.
Right.
And somehow we've lost the understanding of that. And that's kind of like, and for me anyway, it fits into this whole conversation right now, because we have the social media platforms have created the ability to actually have control over the myth.
I think what it is that it's revealed is that there's competing myths.
Sure.
And that the myth that there's a bunch of people that believe the traditional myths, and then there's other people for whom it's already been completely undermined. So there is, and what that means is we don't have a culture anymore. You've got a whole bunch of different cultures because you've got a whole bunch of different myths
instead of one unifying
myth, right? So the breakdown of the unifying myth is, I think, what we've found, what's been revealed. Because you can't even you go on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, and you say anything, and immediately there's somebody that shows up and is like, you're a moron, How could you possibly believe in that? And a bunch of other people jump on and say, but that's what I believe too. And then other people jump on and say, well, then you're all idiots. You're all morons, right? That the gut level assumption about reality is what's defined by our myths. And so when you've got a bunch of different myths, it's I mean, you have Babel is what you have.
Right. So I'm trying to find this clip. So I'm gonna try and build a context here too. I'm just playing all kinds of clips for you today.
Yeah, but this is why I've said
here it goes
over and over. Carl Jung is the guy that as conservative Christians we need to be ready to interact with, right? Because Carl Jung is the one who is actually, I think, set and ready to come inform a Christless conservatism with a new set of with a new unifying worldview. And I've been saying that for a while, and everybody's been ignoring me. And so now all of a sudden, like Jordan Peterson's like, guess who it is? And I'm like, boom.
Yeah, there goes.
I saw that coming.
Before him, was there a Jungian that would have fit inside of what you were talking about? I don't think there was one.
There was the hero with 1,000 faces guy. But he was fringe, right? You had this fringe hero with my books, my hero with 1,000 faces book is upstairs. He is Joseph Campbell. So you had Joseph Campbell before this, and all the artists were reading him, and he was Jungian, and so that's why I was saying, well, the artists are reading him, and the artists are, and I got this from Schaefer, the artists are popularizing Campbell and Jung, and so we know that that's going to be the next thing in politics. If it's what's informing the artists of one generation, it will inform the politics of the next generation. That's the way it's always worked. So it wasn't rocket science that made me say, hey, I better go start studying Jung. He's going to be the guy. It was studying enough, listening to enough interviews with artists and, you know, the major guys, the major players that were guiding the artistic conversation, and they were all pointing backwards to Jung. And I was saying, so I said, oh, well, that's going to be the guy that we need to be ready to answer. He is providing a cohesion to the worldview of the artists, and so he's going to be the one that they go to for a cohesive worldview for politics next.
Okay, I want to go ahead.
Generally,
so there's the new Disney's Snow White. It's been following the trend of Disney to become woke.
I haven't seen anything about it yet.
Well, here's so I saw this clip first, and then I was turning on the fourth turning and listened to what I just played for you.
Okay.
And it brought this clip to mind from she's being interviewed, her and what's the Gal Gadot, who is
Gal Gadot.
Gal Gadot. Yeah. So yeah. She's they're both being interviewed, and she says,
is Gal Gadot playing Snow White?
Oh no, I think it's another girl.
Okay.
Gal Gadot looks too white to play Snow White. So
yeah, I was gonna say that's not a bad casting choice. Gal Gadot.
If you're trying to stay white, yeah, maybe, yeah, that's right.
Are they switching up Snow White?
They are, yeah. So Snow White's she's it's funny. It's like she looks mixed, and so she's close. She's close. They're just like slowly sipping in, like
yeah.
She's kind of white. She kind of.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
Snow White is running for president.
So they just said, we would like to not tell the story of Snow White.
No, that's not. No, it's not enough not to tell the story. They're going to.
Well, I mean, they're just telling a different story, obviously.
Yeah, but it's still called Snow White. So it'd be different if they made a story that was exactly what she said, but it wasn't called Snow White or anything like that. That beat's different. But the fact that they're climbing into Snow White, gutting it out, and then Trojan horsing it into your home is exactly the kind of thing that I think they understand about myths.
Yeah. That is exactly it. And I think myth and fairy tale are actually function in the same sort of way. The fairy tale is what you get when you need stories that function where myth used to function, but you don't have a mythological worldview anymore to be able to say that the stories are true. So like in the ancient world, they actually believed in Zeus, right? So a myth about Zeus could function as a true story. What happens when you no longer believe in that that worldview wherein there are gods, goddesses, and such, but you still need stories to function there? You get fairy tales, right? So fairy tales function and functioned in the same sort of way. They become the archetypical stories of your people group, right? So the fairy tales of a particular people group these are the stories that define good and evil and true and beautiful, and right. This is why a story like George Washington not cutting down the cherry tree and then I cannot tell a lie was important as a fairy tale, and people kept saying, but it's not true. So it doesn't matter. It's functioning as a fairy tale. I don't think the original people that wrote it thought it was true. They were saying the founder of the founding president of our country was honest,
right?
Therefore, Americans should be honest people. We ought to be honest, and that's how that story informed the conscience, or formed, I guess, the conscience of so that somebody, if they told a lie, they felt shame when the lie was revealed.
Oh, I'm not American, right?
Yeah, I'm not acting very American, right? It was an American. I've been collecting old books of American tales, American, the stories of Americana, stories of early America for years, just to understand the conscience of America, right? Because that's really where it was formed and then passed down. The problem is that the enemies of our conscience understand that you undermine it by going after those stories.
And you know what? That's what. Okay, and I don't think, as I was listening to her talk about this is not 1937. It's interesting,
right?
Right? Like, okay, I got you.
That just makes me so angry.
Okay, why?
There's two reasons. One, that's a dumb relativistic argument. It's not 1937 anymore. We're so much better than they were back in 1937, when everybody was evil and everything was turned, everything was, and women were mistreated, and all of this. That chronological snobbery that says because it was a different year, we are therefore better, is so arrogant. It's so arrogant. You look at your grandparents and say that way. I mean,
the fifth commandment too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is straight down the middle of fifth commandment issue, because but then everybody nods along like that was a really good argument. It's not 1937 anymore. Well, it's like, yeah, right. It's not 1937 anymore. That's not an argument. That's just disrespect. So that's
anymore either.
Right. But it's like saying, well, this is what I'm doing today and it's right. Why? Well, because it's Tuesday. If it were Thursday, maybe morality would be different. But on Tuesday, morality's like this, right? The changing of time doesn't shift right and wrong, right? Right and wrong is something that has to do with, are you acting according to your nature, the nature that God gave you, or not? right? Or against it. And it sounds like they're acting, or I mean, you don't get enough of the story. Snow White's running for president was the guy's summary of it, of what they were trying to say. But you could be the leader she thought that she knew she could be. She's not looking for some prince to come save her, and they're like, oh, that's great. So there's not going to be any I see. I don't know. I don't even know the story enough to know. Is there a prince? Is there a prince involved? Is this the end? Is this the end of a line? There's not going to be any children because she's going to be so busy raising the country she can't have children, and so then it's going to actually throw the kingdom into chaos next generation when there's no prince to take over.
So Jason is turning red. He's not red as my shirt.
I'm about to go Shakespearean, right? I'll tell you, this sounds like the opening monologue of the bad guy in a Shakespearean tragedy.
Interesting. I think so, but I think the okay, so here's the first thing I thought, just knowing the kind of conversation that we have. The first thing I thought was like, they want to destroy the gospel. That's the first thing that popped in my head. There's the first thing that popped in my head. And she's not talking about church. She's not talking about Christ. The first thing that popped in my head was they're coming after, and they have been, the idea of a prince that saves a woman, right? And restores her, and then marries her, and then has in the post-millennial, the gospel, because of the post-millennial, the post-millennial view, because of the gospel, things will be better after that, right? After the woman is restored and risen from the dead. They're coming after death and resurrection. They're coming after and they're trying to do the same thing that the serpent did in the garden, was beguile Eve to get her to get out of her office. And it's like, and for me, I wish, the part that bothered me was that I wish more Christians would not be so upset about the fact that Disney is going woke, because that's a reality. But that the myth that they're trying to recreate is they're trying to destroy the Christian true myth by coming after stories like knights and princes and queens, and and the reality of killing the serpent. Like they want to destroy all this, and so they come through and just like, oh, and we just kind of like, okay, whatever, we just won't watch Disney anymore. But there's something bigger going on than just, oh, we're making Disney woke. They're trying to create a world so that the gospel doesn't make sense in it anymore.
Right. Yeah. That the gospel sounds like bad news.
Right.
Hey, there's a prince here to kill the dragon. Oh, is he trying to enslave women?
Yeah. Right. Wait.
Like what? No, the dragon is enslaving women. That's what dragons do. They capture women. They put them in chains. They keep them at the back of their hoard because they're the most valuable thing. And knights rescue women. I mean, this is why I wanted to do the St. George with the show we were talking about, was because it's the story of a dragon who's taking women, and the knight that shows up to kill the dragon to rescue the women. Right. That story, it's out of the book of Revelation. First off, right. It is also in the stars. It's literally the story of the constellations,
cosmos.
You've got Virgo, you've got Draco, you've got the story of the dragon that's going after the virgin that's killed by the night is in the constellations. Right? It is God embedded it everywhere. When a society is healthy, those are the stories they tell. When a society is protecting women, those are the stories that they tell. When a society goes wrong, right, they start telling stories about women warriors. They start telling stories about
women running nations.
Right, women running nations, and right, where the whole story of Snow White, the whole point of it is everywhere that woman goes, the world goes right around her. The enmity between nature and man is solved by her righteousness, right? Like to act like she's not a hero in this story is is to not understand how it works, right? The animals come and call, um the men that are working only for themselves and only for wealth, suddenly, the dwarves, they suddenly have a purpose beyond themselves, and their work is no longer about greed, and it's not, right, their work is put right when she walks into their lives, right? Their house then is put right when she walks into their lives. Everything she touches, because of her cheerful righteousness, because of her loving countenance, everything she touches goes right, which is why the witch hates her, right? That's what the witch hates, is that she's putting the world right, and there's no place in the world for that witch if Snow White becomes queen, right? That's because everything that the queen, because she's going to be such a great queen, that the kingdom will be put right, because the king will be put right by his queen, right? That's what's going on. And so when the prince comes and rescues her and takes her, he's saving her so that she can turn around and save him and his kingdom, right? This is uh this is the kind of story that we want informing our imaginations, that men need these stories to inform their imaginations. What kind of wife do you look for? I mean, this is basically every Jane Austen novel, is marry the right woman, and your life will be full of joy and prosperity. Marry the wrong woman, and everything will go wrong.
That's
Yeah,
proverb.
it's proverbs. It's great literature has to do with so much great literature has to do with the power of with the kind of feminine power that that God has embedded into a wise woman, uh,
Mm.
that puts the world right all around it, and that we protect that. That it's a different kind of strength than the kind, the the atmosphere that a mother and a wife sets in a home makes all the difference,
Mm.
right? That
Mm.
now, and a husband also is an atmosphere setting power. Oh, a father is an atmosphere setting power, but in a different sort of way. He can't do what a woman can do,
Right.
and a woman can't do what a man can do, right? That's the whole point of needing both a man and a woman uh to be on the same mission together. But the the witch hates that. The serpent hates that, right? The serpent goes after women, not just because it's an easy way to get to man, but because it's it's the strength and the power. It's the that is um the transformative strength and the transformative power is such that the serpent can't fight back.
Mm.
It has to separate them out, because it can't fight back against that sort of power.
It's funny. I was going to ask you, what is the story of Snow White? I have it in here. You just went right through it. Like, I was like, oh, that's so good. So then, okay, there's a couple things. I want to turn the corners to get to C.S. Lewis, because I think it fits right inside of here.
Mm-hmm.
But could you make clear for me the difference between a myth and a fairy tale?
Well, I so the well so for a little bit of history, so the fairy tales that um folk you've got folk tales,
Yeah.
fairy tales, um and you've got myths, and they all sort of functioned in that same sort of way. And the gathering up, the Grimm brothers,
Yeah.
uh, Andrew Lang in England, they began gathering up what kind of stories do our people tell, do the German people and the English people, and then I believe Andrew Lang then went to France and gathered up the French fairy tales, and so you begin getting the fairy tales are uh, the myths of the people that don't really have a mythological, quote unquote, mythological worldview anymore, right? That you don't necessarily believe that so for example, um the story of Hercules cleaning out the stables of the gods is a story that you have in the ancient world. But when the Grimm brothers started traveling throughout Germany, and then when Andrew Lang traveled throughout the English-speaking, Celtic English-speaking worlds, both of them found that story was still being told. No one believed in Hercules, no one believed in the gods, but the story of Hercules being given the task of cleaning out the stables in a certain amount of time, and he couldn't actually do it. But then one of the gods, or the god or the goddess of the river, he ends up redirecting the river to go through the stables, and so the stables are all cleaned out by him coming up with a clever way of accomplishing a task that he couldn't complete on his own, right? So that story was still being told, and still functioned as a way to encourage young people and adults. Hey, be like Hercules, be clever. So sometimes you'll have a task that you don't think it can be done, but stop and think, is there a clever way to accomplish it, right? So it's a way of informing the conscience, informing what's true and right and good, by memorable, beautiful stories. So the stories that pass on survival information, to be a good person, or to have a good community, to have a society, these are the things you need. So that's one of the things that how myths function. So and then the other way is they inform what kind of world we live in, right? So you've got both the society forming power of myths, right, and then the cosmos explaining myths, right? So you've really got two. So fairy tales tend to fall, it's sort of all of the ones that inform the conscience, right, that end up becoming fairy tales. So most fairy tales have some sort of magic, or the fairy comes from the word fae, which means like supernatural, but not divine, right? So beyond natural, but under divine, that fae world, the fairy land. There's all sorts of creatures that exist there, some of which are mentioned in the Bible. There are satyr goat demons mentioned in the Bible. There's these vampire creatures from Babylon that are mentioned in the Bible. And then you've got dragons, you've got all sorts of creatures that we think of as existing in fairy land, fae land, that magical, supernatural means above nature.
Right.
It doesn't mean divine, right? So Christians, you can be a Christian. There are Christians that don't have a supernatural worldview.
I think most of them,
yeah, most Christians don't have a supernatural worldview. They believe in the creator creature divide. So there's a creator, right, that exists above us, above nature, above the created nature, and not created nature, above the normal way of doing things.
Yeah.
And then there are angels in heaven, for example, but that they don't think that you're going to interact ever with anything beyond just material nature. That's
they don't think that maybe an angel might get in a fight with the devil over the body of Moses or something like that.
Right. Or that you might pick up an angel on the side of the road,
right?
And
not know,
and not know, right? So, but then there are people that have a supernatural worldview that don't believe in the creator creature divide, right? So they don't believe in what we would call divinity, but they don't believe in divine nature, which is uncreated nature. So everything is on the same scale. So God he's the most powerful of all of the things, but he's still a thing that exists on the chain of being, the same sort of chain of being as us. He just happens to be the most powerful. So this is Star Trek 5 when they meet God. They finally find God, and he's just the most powerful of all creatures. And they have to if I remember right, they have to rearrange their rays in order to be able to hit him, but they can still hit him with the rays if they tune them right.
How much
And
blasphemy were you able to watch in this? That's insane.
well, and the whole thing is, well, he's not really God. He's just this creature that tricked a lot of planets into thinking he was God, but he's really just an alien, it's Mormonism. So, but Mormonism would be an example of, they don't believe in divinity. They have a supernatural world, but they do have a supernatural worldview, right? So when you die, your spirit continues to exist, your soul continues to exist, and then it can become the god of another planet. So there's no divinity, there's no uncreated nature out there, and they might posit one, but he's not a part of their religion. So deists were, they believed in divinity, but he was so separate that there was no interaction with him, and so they could have a non supernatural worldview, but still believe in divinity. So they were materialists who still believed that a god started it all. Right. So, but Christians, we actually have a supernatural view of the world. There are beings beyond us. Our spirit, it continues to exist when we die, and then has to be reunited with our body in the resurrection. There are creatures in the world that are beyond physical or non-physical, maybe, and there are creatures that have and because of that, you can have physical creatures that end up with powers beyond just the normal physical powers. But we also believe in the creator creature divide. So we are closer to an angel than we are to God. Angels are not more like God than us. We're different kinds of creatures. God is not a thing that exists on the chain of being. So we both believe in divinity, and we are supernaturalists. So a good example is there was a Christian. Oh man, it was a Filipino martial art. Now I can't think of what it was, and he was doing some missionary work out east, and there was oh, did I lose you?
Yeah, that's okay. I'll catch
Yeah,
up.
hopefully it kept recording. Yeah.
So
So here's an example of the supernatural worldview. So there was a Christian missionary who was a martial arts expert who was out traveling, and out east, I believe in the Philippines, if I remember the story right. And there was a martial arts guy who taught martial arts, who also claimed or said that he could control his chi, his power, such that he could extend it out beyond his body. And so he would go out and he would basically raise money and raise awareness for his martial arts studio by knocking people into a chair from a distance. So he would gather up his chi and shoot it across space and knock people over. And this Christian martial arts guy, he said, "Hey, anybody volunteering?" And he said, "I'll volunteer, but I have to warn you that I'm a Christian, and so your demonic powers won't work on me, because greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world." And so the guy, he laughs, and everybody kind of laughs, and he goes out there and he gathers up his chi and he shoots it, and it doesn't do anything. And literally the guy can never do that thing again. He destroyed this man's powers because his powers had some sort of demonic entity behind it. And as soon as he tried to use it against a Christian, the demon fled, and he lost the power to be able to push people without touching them. and it destroyed his martial arts practice and the whole bit, right? Because all of a sudden,
It was built
so
on
that
that. Yeah, it's like,
it was built, it was built on that, right? So we're supernaturalists in the sense that we say, yeah, that sort of makes sense, right? There are, you might run into you as you see hear this a lot with missionary stories and other places as well, but that Christians, as they've traveled around, have run into people that have made contact with demons and have demonic powers. um you know I remember and down in California, there was a lot of witchcraft and people purposefully trying to get demons to give them powers, right?
right.
So you run into it. um so we look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense in this kind of world, that there's powers beyond nature. Well, in fairy tales, it's most of the time the stories have to do with somebody that crosses the boundary, either from a land where the land of creatures that have that have connections to those sorts of powers, to the regular world, or from the regular world to the other world, right? So you get witches, you get you get people that are under curses, right? You get Beauty and the Beast, the prince that gets put under a curse. So and the belief that those powers are true doesn't mean that people believed in the particulars of how it could be used, but that in order to really understand the world and really tell the truth about the world, there were that was up for grabs in terms of quote unquote true stories, right? The fairyland. And that really grows because we no longer believe in the mythological ancient world where there are gods, that there's a series of divine beings, right? That there's a whole bunch of divine beings and they live up on Mount Olympus, or they live, up in the mountains of Japan, or that they live, that there's divine beings up there. But the Bible is closer to something like animism, in the sense that there are spiritual beings all over the place in its view of the world, but animism doesn't believe in divinity, right? Animism believes there's spirits everywhere, but there's not a divinity above it all.
Right.
And so Christianity is the mix between the two. So the stories that we tell then are the ones that inform us what kind of world we live in, so what we can expect. Those basic fairy tale stories that really function as myths. Well, the scriptures actually took over in the West. The scriptures took the place of the myths that told us the origin story, that told us where everything was going, that told us what's wrong with the cosmos, why the cosmos is broken, and how the cosmos has been or will be put right. Right. So those mythological stories that give us the cosmological answers, the scriptures took that role. The fairy tales continued the role that myths gave us, or the role that myths had of informing our conscience. We used fairy tales for that. And so some of that, parables, the parables function that way in the scriptures. Some of the stories about David and Goliath have taken on that kind of role, but other stories in the Bible you don't use in that mythological way. So Samson solving riddles becomes a fairy tale, but Samson killing Philistines with the jawbone of an axe never becomes with the jawbone of an ass never becomes a fairy tale, right? We don't use that story that way. Hey kids, let me tell you what to do if injustice is done to your family.
Mhm.
Samson found the jawbone of an ass and he piled the bodies of his enemies around. Right? We don't tell that story as a fairy tale, as a way of informing the conscience. It is still part of our mythos in the sense that we say this is what God has done for us. God raises up heroes. God raises Christ is the new Samson.
Right.
The bodies of he puts everything right. The bodies of the demons were chained up in Hades because of Christ's work. That sort of thing. But it never became a fairy tale informing the conscience of the next generation.
So the okay. Oh, we're gonna get to this, I promise. So then when you see drift in your fairy tale, because you have a mythos that's become another
You have
mythos.
the mythos has changed. The mythos, and because the mythos has changed, the second, how would you put it? Because the mythos has changed, the morality is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fairy tales have to shift.
Yeah,
you have to get. Yeah, exactly. You need new fairy tales to give new morality to form the conscience according to the cosmos as you see it. Right? So if you believe that the cosmos is a power struggle about power dynamics, right? If you think Foucault is right, Machiavelli is right, that the Enlightenment was right, it's a power, everything is power dynamics, then you need to retell stories such that Snow White, instead of becoming the wife, which is down the chain of authority, she's oppressed, she's because of power dynamics. You need to tell a story such that if she's going to be the hero, that she ends up being the one on top, pushing everybody else down.
And
right.
And so then they take. So then they're stealing from us. So then they take like your blackness and they say, okay, who's the highest minority group, or who's the group that has the most equity in being downtrodden currently, and let's use them as let's jam you. Let's use them as our gateway to get into this narrative.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and this is where you actually can't escape Jesus, because you don't have anyone saying, I am so oppressed in the Old Testament. I am the one being crucified here. I'm the martyr, as if that's a good thing in the ancient world.
Right.
It's all glory based on strength, right? I'm pushing others down, therefore I get glory. You get Homer would laugh critical race theory out of the room. You're the most oppressed, therefore you have
power.
You have power.
That's an interesting point.
But Jesus flipped the world on its head.
Yeah.
And the martyrs throughout history that have followed him have flipped the world on its head, and those stories have become part of our mythos, right? You tell the story of Polycarp, not the story of the governor who burned him. Actually, we don't even know the governor. I mean, somebody might know the governor who burned him's name, but I don't. You know the name Polycarp because the Roman Empire didn't survive the martyrdom of Polycarp, and so now it's as if the devil and the or the left has learned, oh, martyrdom is where the power is, and so they're claiming it because they're after power. The world has turned upside down, and so they're like, okay, got to climb to that side.
And they're trying to hijack it now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. So Christ comes in and changes the whole structure of the world and where the real power is, which is in humbleness, humility. The meek shall inherit the earth, right?
Right.
And it is, and that's what's happening. And they're like, okay, how do we fake meekness as much as possible so that we can get power?
Exactly. So they get up in your face and they scream, "We're the meekest of all. Shut your face," until you bow down at the power of their meekness. And you're like, it's weird, but it's the devil's always inverting.
Clever.
You know,
That's really clever. Interesting. And so what's happening too, though, is that when we see that, then we don't really know what to do when people really are oppressed, though. Then because we're like, oh, whatever. There's become a callousness to us to not even acknowledge what real oppression looks like because we've been so abused with the term and the word from people who really aren't.
right. And that's exactly what you get this weird thing where you see somebody being oppressed and you say, "Oh man, that's messed up," and everybody's like, "But is it real?" Because there's so many fakes right there. It's if
Right.
you've got 1,000 fake $20 bills and 2 real ones, nobody's gonna take the 2 real ones seriously anymore. And that's really what's happened.
And so the mythos now, or should I say, or the fairy tales now that have come out have organized in such a way that we see oppress, oppressor. And that's where critical theory, that narrative, critical theories come after that narrative has already been put in place. It had to happen in some way.
Yeah.
And now critical theory is just capitalizing on that reality.
Well, critical theory is all of the people that look around and just recognize how the world works, how the world's currently working, right? The critical theory didn't change things, right? That what changed things was the immorality, right? The immorality of multiple generations, is what changed things. And then you get critical theory come along and saying, "Let me tell you how the new world works. Let me tell you about the new world order."
Okay, so I can talk about this for so long because it's so interesting. There's so many connecting pieces to it, and man, there is I keep hearing Nate Wilson come back and saying we need more Christian fiction. We need more Christian stories. Because there's far more. There's something going on in the shape of reality that if we don't start fighting for it in that category, it's going to be a hard fight to actually, we're already having it even inside of Christendom. We're already having it inside of Christendom where the world, instead of us thinking about the scriptures as a foundation for reality and what our own symbols mean and what they really do. And it's now we're looking at from the secular side, and now we're reading that into the scriptures instead of because of the mythos is starting to change.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
that makes sense.
I do. I think the myth. So you've got two things going on. You've got people trying to. So the Christian in America, the Christian mythos was first diluted by conservatives.
Ouch.
So we diluted the Christian mythos. Now, what ended up happening was now you've got half of the people fighting for that diluted version of the mythos, trying to restore it. And then you've got other people that are saying, "Oh, but that was a diluted version of the mythos. We've got to drop the mythos altogether."
Yeah.
Rather than saying, but as God does, you have people show up with the pieces of the mythos to restore in the wrong spots. Right? They don't show up at the universities. They don't show up at the places of power. Right? You get you get a guy like J. Vernon McGee.
Yeah.
Right. Who he's got a disrespectful accent. He talks in that folksy way. And he shows up but it turns out that guy he had a really clear eye for understanding where the fake mythos was attacking and how to defend it from the scriptures. Right. He was incredibly well educated and had a huge impact for good on the church in defending exactly those points of the mythos in his Through the Bible.
Yeah.
His commentary on Leviticus is incredible. It's the strangest thing where you're like, he's
How
a
did that happen?
dispensational, this folksy dispensational Midwestern preacher who is defending the cosmos from the oncoming hordes of orcs. You think, and doing it really well. And in those points, and is one of those places where he's there unraveling the mythos from the Americana, the American mythos, right? And doing it really, really well, and having huge impact on the church. And out of his ministry ends up flowing, the creation defense, the defense of 6-day creation, the defense of the Bible as not just without error, but the Bible as the place to which we go for answers, right? Out of his ministry ends up growing all of these different really incredible mythos defending institutions. Right? And you think, that's not where I would have brought it in, but I also wouldn't have brought the Messiah in through in through a manger.
Right.
Where no one was looking. So which is why the wise men go to Herod.
Yeah.
Because that's where normal people expect.
That's where the king's supposed to be at.
That's where a king to be. Right.
Where yeah, that's exactly right.
So and it's the same, with things like the Jesus people movement, right? The number of incredible reformations that came out of that is amazing, but it's not the right, quote unquote, the right place for it to happen, right? So this is why when you look around and say, man, a couple things. Whenever I get to do like a joint service with other churches or anything, and everybody wants the sermon, I want the confession of sin, right? Like, because because God has built a world where humility is the back door that lets in reformation, right?
Right.
And we just don't understand that, right? We always think, where's the point of power? It's up there. Okay, let's go get it. Rather than, where's the back door that's going to let the Reformation in? Because that's what God has always done, right? Is after the fact, we tell the stories of the heroes of the Reformation as if it was so obvious.
Everyone knew it was going to happen.
Everyone knew it was going to happen like that. You can't. It was unstoppable. But then you look at, like, wait, is a backwater town of Germany on the edge of the Holy Roman Empire? Germany?
Can anything good come from Germany?
Can anything good come out of Germany? Yeah. It's the Martin Luther was a country bumpkin. In terms of where he sat in the empire. Right, he was in the wrong spot to be able to make any sort of reformation, but he got hold of the scriptures and he said, "I'm not letting go." Right, when he treated the scriptures, when he let the scriptures out of the cage and let them roar, as Spurgeon talks about, it doesn't matter where the lion starts eating. It's going to eat everything. There's nothing to stop it.
All right. So did I take you too far away from Antitypes to the false Cupid?
You never did.
Okay.
Should we figure out how to get back to it?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. So can you kind of I went back and listened to our podcast on the false Cupid.
Yeah.
And so, man, God was so kind to us in that everybody needs to go back and listen to that podcast. First of all, let me talk about real quick. Man, I went back and bought the book from Yuri and Joffrey on smoking.
Yeah.
Man, it's a good book.
Isn't it a good book?
It's why we don't push that. That's a good book. It is so good from beginning to end. There's another couple books they reference in there that are also good too. You just need to go by. Everybody needs to listen to the podcast with Yuri. That was really great. Because in the one you talk about Nick Fuentes and that whole movement, it was just but so I've been going back. I usually go back. So the way I treat Knox Unplugged is I usually go back and listen to a show because I don't get it all, and so I'll go back and listen to them. I listen to the one on Gnosticism. I listen to those multiple times, 5-6 times. And then the one on the false Cupid, I listen to now. This is probably my third time going back listen. And then our live show, I'm third time going through that one again. The world ends when the metaphor has died. So but the false Cupid, man, as I was going back listening, I just kind of want to go through a just short recap of the false Cupid, because we used, it wasn't even on purpose, but we used Everything Everywhere All at Once and the Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
To talk, and the idea was love isn't love, and there's false loves that take you off course ultimately. And they can give you that it can give, I don't even want to say feel. Is it right to define feel? You can feel as if they give you a false sense of feeling. Or is it false sense of feeling, or is it what would it be?
I think it's feelings that don't match up with reality.
That's right.
So false feelings is
False
how
feelings.
is yeah.
But and
The feelings aren't right.
It reminds me of the charismatics in some way, where there's like they have false feelings and they're sincere,
Yep.
but it's not connected to reality or to the scriptures. And so then what you end up doing is you still have to gin it up in every way, and then you have to make everybody else play a part to gin it up as well.
Right.
And so anyway, but would you go through like a simple, just quick, like short recap of false Cupid, and then how the antitypes to the false Cupid? Because as I was going through and reading this, I felt, it felt like that Lewis was having a fight with authors.
Yes. Well, he is having a fight with authors that are misinterpreting or misrepresenting Edmund Spencer.
Okay,
because they're reading him in the wrong context.
all
And
right.
so it's a literary fight in saying you're missing what Spencer's saying because you're reading him from your, as if he is writing in your context. But let me help you understand the context he's writing in, because it's something actually better that he's saying, more important, or restorative.
Okay, so
And in this is where Lewis is he's a humanist who's like, we have to, even if you end up saying something that is true and getting it from Spencer, if it wasn't what Spencer meant, we still should work until we understand what Spencer meant. We can end up disagreeing with Spencer, that's fine, but we have to work hard to make sure we are understanding
what he
the author before we judge whether he's right or wrong. And so a lot of this is him dropping the or laying the intellectual foundation of Spencer's age, laying the concrete again, because people's interpretations of Spencer has gone wonky.
Yeah.
And so he says, let me lift up the house, lay the concrete from that time period, and so then the house will set and everything will straighten back up. And then we can judge whether or not he was a good architect or not. But we can't put the house on the wrong foundation so that part of it's hanging off the end and then say that was the architect's fault.
Okay,
but it's not that you don't judge the architect, right? The architect still might be bad, but you should put the house on the foundation that it was intended to be on.
Judge him rightly, right?
Yeah, judge him rightly. And so the false Cupid, first, it's something that he says you can actually track through literature. That's Spencer didn't just invent out of whole cloth this idea of the false Cupid, but what the false Cupid is the in existentially, right, in our experience, the false Cupid is that the feelings of love that don't lead you to beauty.
Mm.
And so therefore they don't lead you through to goodness, right? So you see that something is beautiful. And I just saw somebody saying something about this, about their wife. I can't remember who. I think it was Michael Foster. He was saying, when I first saw the woman I ended up marrying, it was her natural beauty that drew me, like her, external beauty. I thought, man, that girl's cute across the room. What has kept me in love with her is the internal characteristics of beauty that turned out to match the external beauty. The false Cupid is when you when you see something from across the room and you think, ooh, I'm attracted to that because it's beautiful, and that feeling of love draws you towards it. But as you get closer, you realize either the beauty is false or the beauty is thin, and that there's an ugliness underneath it, there's a badness, a lack of moral goodness,
No virtue.
no virtue underneath it. So you end up the external beauty, or the circumstances that caused you to fall in love, led you, instead of leading you to something virtuous, led you to something invirtuous, right? So that's the false Cupid. I mean, it's the principle that pornography works on, or Playboy works on, whatever. I was just talking to somebody about Bill Cosby, right?
Mm.
They were like, hey, do you think Bill Cosby was guilty or innocent? And I was trying to explain the complications that I see in the whole business. I said, but here's the thing: you spend your late teen, early 20s at the Playboy Mansion, and I guarantee nothing good's going on there, right? Nothing good's coming from that, right? So
No.
I look back and I say, now maybe there's with 30, 40 years of innocent Bill Cosby, which it seems like there was, right? That he did some dumb stuff, or even some evil stuff, some that everybody was doing at the Playboy Mansion, because they're at the Playboy Mansion, and then he tried to live, and he tried to then follow on that with an upright life, right? Let's say that's exactly the story as it happens. The Playboy Mansion is not a place where goodness and virtue is encouraged.
Yeah,
Right?
man.
It's in fact very discouraged. Hugh Hefner was an open he was an open he was a follower of Nietzsche. If you watch the early TV show, Playboy TV show, which was called After Hours, which is, there's no nudity or anything, it's like actually on television. He argues for Nietzsche as the greatest philosopher ever, that they're great, that nihilism, that you define everything by what it's not, leaves us open to a pure pursuit of pleasure with no guilt and no shame, right? And so that's why he thinks Nietzsche is the greatest philosopher. And then he built his empire on that principle. You hang around there, it might look beautiful from a middle distance, but you hang around there, and that's going to be an ugly, ugly place.
Mm-hmm.
So
the false Cupid.
That's the false Cupid. And so whatever else you can say Bill Cosby was brought down by his willingness to follow the false Cupid as a young man.
So can you also consider it that woman in Proverbs who's been playing with cinnamon?
Right? Yeah, she's been playing with cinnamon. She's been laying it out. She's figured out how to she's got the honey shaped tongue, the honeycomb shaped tongue, and she says, "Hey, my husband is away."
Right.
Well, if you shouldn't be walking by her house over and over and over. Yeah, but that's what the false Cupid will do, is because that the it's a pretty door, but the steps go all the way down
Mm-hmm.
to hell.
Yeah. So then you get to the point, the false Cupid, and then the antitypes to the false Cupid.
The antitype of Cupid. So not the yeah. So then you get the antitypes of the false Cupid, and the antitype. So he says the antitypes of the false Cupid, and then he also talks about the antitypes of Venus and Cupid. So first, type and antitype.
Yeah.
Right?
Break that down for me.
Yeah. So the type and antitype is a literary device where you've got a character that holds a particular role in the story that is a character that's coming in advance, right? So David as the king of Israel, and the killer, the slayer of giants, the king of Israel, the bringer of peace, all of those things. He is the type of Jesus when Jesus comes, and Jesus is the antitype, right? So
or Joshua, same thing too.
Yeah, Joshua. Yeah, so you've got lots and lots of types. I mean, Jonah is, we're told specifically, he's a type of Christ. Now, a Christ figure is different than a type in the sense that Jonah isn't really a Christ figure, in the sense that he is disobeying God the whole time, right? A Christ figure voluntarily gives himself, and that, so a Christ figure is a different type. It's a literary device also. It's a different type of literary device. The type is a way of setting up the vocabulary that you need for a later, to understand a later character in a literary sense, right? So so when you start talking about the antitype of the false Cupid, what you're talking about, later characters. So you've got this false Cupid, then later characters that come along, and the false Cupid has given you the vocabulary you need to understand these particular bad guys. The antitype of the false Cupid is a way of understanding. The false Cupid gives you the vocabulary you need to recognize particular bad guys. And so sometimes this is something that Shakespeare does this sort of thing well, where he'll set up he'll use a character to set up the to set up what you need to know to be able to understand when the character makes the wrong decision, right? It's a matter of images and patterns and shapes, right? So you're setting up the images and the patterns and the shapes so you can recognize when something happened, so you have a way of saying, oh, he's acting like scripturally he is acting like David now. When Jesus goes up on the mountain in order to give the Beatitudes, right? You can say, oh, he's an antitype of Moses,
right?
He's giving the new law of the new covenant, right? So Moses gave the law of the covenant from Mount Sinai. Jesus gives the new law when he goes up on the mountain in order to deliver the Beatitudes, which are like a new form of they're a new law, like the Ten Commandments. So it's a image building, vocabulary building literary device. So the false Cupid gives Edmund Spenser the ability to quickly identify what goes wrong with certain characters. So when you meet certain monsters and they're beautiful, it's a beautiful woman on the front, but then you get to the back and it's a devouring monster, right? Well, the false Cupid has given you the vocabulary you need to be able to say, and now this this monster is doing what the false Cupid is. An incarnation of the false Cupid, or a false Cupid doing the work of the false Cupid, that sort of thing.
So then, okay, work with me. I'm just working from our earlier conversation. So then the new Snow White that's coming out, is it laying the groundwork for an antitype so that when you see the prince, he's the bad guy, or who knows how the story is going to play, or when you see somebody trying to save you, like, oh, that's 1937. You know, it's like are they setting up in their way that they're doing their story so that it's following that same sort of rhythm where, oh, but it's flipping it. It's completely flipping it. You know, so now guys who want to be prince and want to take care of women, they're oppressive. And the way they're creating this story, they're creating the antitype so that you can see it. Once it starts happening, it's like, hey, I'll open up a door for you. What is this, 1937? Right. Right. That's what it's doing, right?
So that's how fairy tales function in our conscience forming. They give the type, they are the types. Right. They're and this is exactly that quote from Carl Jung, the archetypes. Right. They give our imagination, they give our conscience types so that we can recognize the antitypes in our life, or which character we are the antitype of, and which people are the antitypes of different characters, right? So this is why Jung's philosophy is so important, because this is one of the things he gets right. But that's coming from a scriptural understanding of the story of history. The world is full of antitypes, and we remember when we talked about Freud.
Yeah
So Freud, what he wanted to use for the types of characters, for the archetypes, was all Greek mythology. This is why we talk about the Oedipus complex, because he's trying to develop this a psychology based on the types of
incest.
So he still assumes
the
unity of humanity and the unity of the cosmos, and that there are types that are given to us in mythology, and then we identify which, or a psychotherapist identifies which antitype we are currently playing based on our experience, right? He's the priest. Yeah. So but the scriptures do actually function that way, but not alone. The scriptures function that way and establish people as the kind of creatures that continue subcreating stories, subcreating types, right? So the wisdom of mankind through the ages is delivered from age to age through stories that give the next generation's imagination types through which they can identify the world. Freud wanted to circumvent the scriptures as that kind of literature and replace it with Greek mythology. Right. So like we when we read the Bible, we often do this unknowingly. Like we read the story of the Good Samaritan and we say, oh, man, which character am I? That was convicting, because I saw myself as the antitype of the Levite that crossed the road. Right. I see myself there. We do this all the time. We're created to do this. This is a good thing to do. The question, though, is which stories do we take as fairy tales? I've been semi-joking for 15 years, 20 years probably, that the superhero movie is gives kids the types, the archetypes for their conscience, and that's a good thing, right? That's about the only thing that's holding the generation together is superhero movies. Now we're getting rid of those too, right?
Actually, I think we're just we're taking the virtue out of them. right? Which is
Yeah.
snapping the virtue right out of them. And comics books did that. That's what the superhero narrative. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the movie The Iron Giant is about. It's about the formation of the conscience of a giant robot through comic books. That is what makes him able to turn his strength that was intended for evil, was intended for war, it was intended to be a death-dealing strength, into a life-protecting strength. It's his conscience is rebuilt by comic books. It's a brilliant movie.
Did it? No. So you got Australia, who is seeing the falling apart of the family, and particularly husbands and men, and that their dads are horrible to their kids, and they're like, you know what? We need a type, Bluey.
Yep.
Right.
we need to help. We need to do something to inform the consciences of these dads.
And so, and it's funny that I've seen more men on social media saying, I saw a picture the other day, who I want to be when I grow up, and it was like Bluey's dad.
Bluey's dad, yeah.
Totally.
You know, and that's actually they're not wrong. Like, Bluey's dad's a good dad.
Yeah. What's behind it is like Australia knows that we don't have a good nation apart from families, and so like, but I don't like their government.
Oh yeah, I mean that's.
But
I don't want the state doing that either. At the same time, so they're looking around and they're like, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, like
we're not going to survive.
The Christians ain't going to do it.
Well, I mean, I my wife pointed me to an interview recently with somebody who has been doing the research on post transition surgery.
Oh yeah,
right? So
yeah.
when somebody transitions from one gender, quote unquote, sex to the other, right? When you do those been tracking that throughout Europe, and she did all this research and then presented it, and now those surgeries they're starting to be made illegal throughout Europe, right? Because they're 20 years beyond us on a lot of these things, but they're starting to realize that those surgeries are only making it worse, right? So we're just starting to try and get those surgeries going, and they're already on the back end saying, man, this surgery is actually an attack. This is not healthcare, right? These surgeries are an attack on people, and they're so but the reason it's so effective is because she just is telling the stories. Let me tell you the story of this person who went through the surgery. And this is what's ended up happening. This is what they thought would happen. This is what happened. This is what they thought would happen. This is what happened. And you start to realize in the storytelling that every single one of those stories undoes some sort of fairy tale that we're telling ourselves about self-fulfillment. Right. If
false Cupid.
It's all false Cupid stuff.
Wow.
That and the reality, so the fairy tales that really lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years were the ones that each generation told it to the next generation because they found it to be true themselves in their life.
So is this why Up resonated so much? Right? It was.
Yeah. I mean, besides, if you just need a good cry, you watch the opening sequence of Up.
But I mean, yeah, but it referenced the old world that that in a haze now passing, right?
Right. That, and it's so because the reason that everybody cries at that spot is because they know that world is not available it's not being offered to them anymore. The world is that whole world is gone.
That kind of love, that real Cupid.
This is something my wife and I have been talking about a lot, is the next generation of kids they're not falling in love. They're not. You have an upcoming generation of
Lord have mercy.
and you've got a couple of different kinds of responses from the church. You've got the people coming along and saying like, it's all right, just find somebody that's a good Christian, just get married, have kids, that's the mission, you guys will fall in love eventually. And then you have the kind of throw up your hands like, we wanted to get married. How come none of y'all want to get married? I don't understand. How come none of y'all are falling in love? I don't understand. Right. So you've got the and I don't think either of those, I mean,
the latter one, the previous one though, would have worked in a different world because they had a different metaphor.
Exactly. It would have worked 2 generations ago. And I think in some ways 3 generations ago, that is what happened, right?
Yeah.
Is people looked around and they were like, ooh, you see those, you hear the stories. People didn't move around
right
in the way we do now. And so they knew, you live in a small town, you only know 20 available females.
Right.
And there's 20 available dudes, and everybody ends up married.
Right? Lithuania now.
Right. So they had a different understanding of falling in love, but it still was, the expectation was kids pair off. Kids grow up and pair off.
Well, love was inevitable. Like that it was inevitable. Of course you will. It just takes time. You'll fall in love. Right.
Like that's one of the things that like I love about shows like that 70s show. Like it's got its problems. There's some really funny writers on there and some really crass writers on there, and it's got its problems, but the mom and dad's relationship is amazing. Right? Because he's just grumpy and crabby, and he's always like got a snide word for the kids, and the wife is always like, honey, right? And she says the wrong thing, does the wrong thing, and he's always rolling his eyes. And then the kids leave the room and they're like, hey, now that we're alone, and they have this really sweet marriage that the kids are just always in the way of, and they can't and because and neither of them really grow or change or anything, but they always end up doing the right thing.
Right.
When they end up doing the right thing, and when they do, they find that attractive in one another.
Right.
And it's just, I always thought that really is the glue of the show, was that the mom and dad's marriage is so is the thing that ends up informing everybody else's, all the kids' desires, right? Because the other neighbor marriages are messed up and weird and goofy, but you've got this one solid marriage, and so all the kids hang out there. All the kids want to be in the basement of that house because that marriage is impenetrable.
Right.
Even when they fight and everything, the marriage is impenetrable. Nobody in the kids in the upcoming generation don't believe that. They think that is a fairy tale in the other sense of the word, right? That's not real. And so they don't have a vision for marriage. And I think the gospel is what restores that. This is when he starts talking about the antitypes of Cupid, where you get this and the antitype of nature. It's in a footnote on page 42.
Oh yeah.
Where he says Casanus, who was a Italian Neoplatonist. It's like an Italian kind of Gnostic Christian. Tells us that the pagans gave God many names, including Venus and nature. And he's commenting on the fact that you had that infinite unity precedes all distinctions, where a man does not differ from lion, and following Hermes, who was so Hermetic theology in Neoplatonism was like the secret secret theologies. So hermeneutics comes from that. It's the unpacking of what's hidden underneath. So Hermes was the cause of all comprises in himself masculine and feminine.
Yeah, I was reading that. Yeah.
So he would have understood and approved of Spencer's meaning. And then quoting Leone Embreo, who I actually don't know, and I didn't get a chance to look up who he was, but he wrote a Italian work called The Philosophy of Love. So he in God, the lover, the beloved, and their love are all one and the same. And although we count them to be three and say that the lover is informed by the beloved and that the love derives from them both, as from the father and the mother, yet the whole is one simple unity and essence. And so love in a Christian understanding, and this is where the Neoplatonists are responding and trying to push the church back into a particular direction. Love is a creative force, right? Love brings things into being that weren't there before, and that because God created out of his overflowing love, all of this is made of love.
I heard you talking about that. Love spills over.
Yeah, love spills over. New things come into being.
Babies.
Babies, right? And that God, he literally baked it into creation. That love is such a powerful thing that when a man and a woman fall into love, whole new beings pop into existence that did not have a pre-existence, right? And this is where the Plato believed in the pre-existence, but there's no pre-existence in Christianity. Whole new things pop into existence. But he said it starts before the baby, because a family is a whole new thing in the first place, right? When a man and a woman get married, a family is a unit, is a covenantal unit that didn't exist before. And because of that, the love brought, so baked into the relationships of men and women is this creative power of love. There was no Mr. and Mrs. Jason Farley or the Jason Farley family until we got married. We take vows and we get married. A new thing, a new unity, and it's because the unity is such that it has its own essence. We've talked a little bit about essences, and but that the essence wasn't there before.
Right.
There was no Mr. and Mrs. Jason Farley. There was no family. There was, and so it's a new thing that didn't exist that has its own essence as a unity.
Shall leave his father, mother. Yeah, this is back to Genesis, right?
So all the way back in Genesis, it's a world in which new things really are created by love. Right. And then out of that love, then new human beings pop into existence. So love is so when they said they called God Venus in the ancient world, or they called God nature in the ancient world, it's not it's what he's saying is Venus as a divine power, a divine creative power. How he explains it is that it's like a shaft of light that comes from the sun, right, and shows you something that's real. And if you follow that shaft of light, you find the origin of it, right? And they called the shaft of light that they knew, they called the shaft of light Venus. And if you track the shaft of light back to what does he call it? The cause of all, right? You can follow the shaft of light back to the cause of all, which is Aristotle, right? That's what Aristotle calls God, the great cause, the first cause, the origin cause of all. So he says, when you look around and you see people falling in love, and then he says nature, because animals do it too. right? That and this is that opening of the opening chapter. The opening chapter of Chaucer. This is Chaucer. Some of this is behind what he's talking about, what Edmund Spenser is talking about in the general prologue of Chaucer. When the sweet showers of April have pierced the drought of March and pierced it to the root. Right now, so he says he uses just a straight down the middle sexual metaphor in the first lines. The first couplet of Chaucer is that April, April is the germinating partner of nature, and March is the receiver of germination. Is that a nice way to put it? Right.
Sure.
That so, but think about how he's using this metaphor, right? That the moving forward in history of nature, right? As history moves through time, that the next month impregnates the previous month, right? This is a really complex metaphor, right? That time, because time turns out in God's providential building of creation, time turns out to be necessary for for the creation of new things, or the renewal of things. That April can impregnate March that came before it and produce all of the new life that is born of time, right? So that time, God has baked into time the way that baked into time and into the sexuality of mammals, and the same image, the regenerative the regenerative power of love, the regenerative power of beauty, right? And so he says, and then every vein is bathed in that moisture, whose quickening or life-giving force will impregnate the flower, right? So why does it rain in April? Because March was dry, and in order to get pregnant, you need to moisten the receiving end of the impregnate. Right? This is, I don't know who's listening, so I don't know what words I can use, but basically, time.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So because you have in the flower, you have the same sort of I've got to just get
Go for it.
explicit.
Go for it. Let's go for it.
So
Get the
kids, if you're listening, go ask your parents to listen to this before they listen. But basically, so April comes along, the rains come, so that the vagina of March will be wet enough to be able to be pierced by the penis of spring, right? And then he says the same way the flowers have male and female, right? But they need the water as well, right? So he says the way that the bodies of men and women work, and the way the cycles of time and the seasons work, and the way that flowers work. And then he goes on to this is about line 8. He says, and when the small birds are making melodies that sleep all night that sleep all the night long with open eyes, right? They go to bed, but their eyes are open because they're busy making babies. Nature so prompts them and encourages. Then people long to go on pilgrimages, right?
We
So
talked about this poem before.
we've talked about this before, but it's the same thing that it's the same thing when you talk about the antitype of Venus, right?
Mm.
That God that God built into the world the type of
Mm.
love that brings new life, love that gives life, love that impregnates and brings new things into the world that have their own essences that are separate from the thing that created it, right? Which is says he's saying that this is all built that the world is the kind of poem, the world is a kind of place where two people that love one another come together, and a new person that is not either of them, that takes a piece of both of them but is not either of them, comes into existence and has its own story before the Lord, but was created through the love of these two people, right? And he says that, and then he says, but nature is filled with this, right? So you've got an apple. There's a part in here where it talks about the west winds carrying all this along, right? You've got an apple tree with female flowers. A bee comes and lands on the male flowers of a different apple tree and comes and impregnates this flower by bringing the seed over from that male flower to this female flower, and an apple is born. And then you take that apple and you plant it, and then a whole new tree comes up with its whole own story, with its whole own essence, right? Just that happens in the natural world. It happens with people. It happens with animals. It happens with birds and mice and everything. And he says, and it happens in the passage of time, where each winter brings forth spring. Each spring brings forth a summer. Each summer brings forth a fall, and each fall brings forth a new winter, and each one is its own but is born out of the other, and that it's love that is that time is impregnated by love with the future. God's love has impregnated time such that the future is born out of it, right?
Mm.
So this is where this understanding of a unified cosmos, it's so, what C.S. Lewis is saying is it, and Alistair Fowler, who helped with the putting together of the book, what they're saying is the view of the cause of a unified cosmos that is animated by love is so different from a mechanistic understanding of the world that people are misunderstanding when they pick up. They understand each word, they understand each sentence, but they're misunderstanding the point that Spencer is making, because he doesn't have anything like a mechanistic worldview.
Mm.
So his view of the world is so fully unified, and the unifying force is the love of God. And then the world then reflects that by finding a overflowing, by love creating a unity that overflows into the creation of new essences, new things that didn't exist before. It would be, I think, considered probably a magical worldview by modernists or by mechanists, but it's not really a magical worldview. It's a love-driven worldview. It's a fundamentally love-driven understanding. So the cosmos turns in this view of the world, and C.S. Lewis talks about this in his book on the medieval cosmology, that the cosmos turns, right? You look up into the sky, the stars move out of a love for God. God has that's the power that pushes them, right? So when you say what makes gravity work, the medievals would say, well, the love of God, right? They're above the moon, and so they're not affected by sin. So they are still, the sky is still motivated by pure love. And so it stays in its liturgical position and walks its liturgical dance and sings its liturgical songs. Because it's continually motivated by pure love in response to its creator. Right. And we say, well, what do you call that force? What do you call it? Gravity. I mean, we can call it gravity. That's fine. We don't know what makes gravity work. And so I'm fine calling it gravity. But what makes gravity work? Well, love. Love is what makes gravity work. I sound crazy right now.
No.
But to the modern person, this is crazy talk, because it's a view of the world that there's the fundamental music under all of it is the overflowing love of the creator, and of the Father for the Son, because all of this, we're told, is created to glorify the Son. So this is why it's so hard for us to get into the mindset of somebody like Spencer, because his understanding of the cosmos is so different. But that quote that you sent from the book, what's so interesting is as he talks about the audiobook quote, he talks about that he fundamentally is a materialist. Jung is, because he puts it into the hardwired into our biology, is how he describes it.
Right.
But he says it's the collective unconscious that holds the archetypes together, right? That's that part they used to call it that man was a microcosm. Each individual man was a microcosm, and then humanity as a whole was a cosmos, was a world unto itself, and that then each subset of mankind, right, the city, the government, the church, the family, were a cosmos, and that cosmoses run on a particular pattern, right? And that is a pattern that is either informed by love or it's informed by rivalry.
Right.
The curse brings in a rivalry informed cosmos, but it's intended to run on love. And so whatever cosmos you find, it runs on love. And so justice can be an outworking of love, or it can be an outworking of rivalry. Hamlet shows you what happens when justice becomes an outworking of rivalry instead of an outworking of love. Something like Much Ado About Nothing is a story about when you can shift from rivalry to building small cosmoses of love, and how it ends up putting the world right around it. So the microcosms get put right, and then it causes the macrocosm to be put right, and the evil people are forced out of the macrocosm at the end of Much Ado About Nothing, because you put the microcosms right, and you get rid of the rivalries, and they work on love. It's an understanding of the interconnectedness of all things that you have in Shakespeare and Spencer and Chaucer, right? In the entire medieval world that we don't have anymore. So I think, when somebody says, "Hey, we got to put the world right. What should I do?" And I say, well, first start with getting your marriage right. Well, what effect does that have? Well, in an interconnected cosmos, you don't get to choose the effect, but you know that it has a huge effect. Because you know that your marriage is connected to everything else. And when your marriage is out of whack, then you know that it's causing other things to be out of whack. And when you can put it right, and it's run on love rather than rivalry, run on self-giving love and overflowing love, that affects your kids, that affects your neighborhood, that affects your church, that affects your city, your state, your nation. But not in a one-to-one, like it's not something that we can control and track, because it's not, we weren't given those levers. We were given us, because it's not a lever type of machine.
It's not
what we're given. It's a jurisdiction.
Yes, covenant.
It's a covenant. It's a jurisdiction that we're given, and going and trying to putting the other jurisdictions right without putting the jurisdiction you're given right means that you're not in your right spot to actually affect anything.
It reminds me of the story of Naaman, where, it's like, You mean to tell me if I want to fix the world, all you're asking is that I go and love my wife, raise and baptize my kids, love my neighbor, and and it's
show
like,
show up to worship on Sunday.
show up to worship, go to church,
To
worship the Lord on Sunday.
Take your part in the choir, take your part in the liturgy.
Yeah. And that's it. Surely there's more. Surely.
Well,
and why wouldn't you come out here and tell me the truth? I said, all you have to go do.
The reality is there is more. You just won't know what it is until you put those things right. Because when we're faithful there, then God will start saying like, hey,
yeah,
here's this too.
Right.
Here's this too. Right. And when your jurisdiction is running properly, it can handle more weight. And so God puts more things on it. But when it's out of whack, you get, you see this a lot with politicians where, their marriage isn't strong, and then they get some political position of power and things fall apart. And because their marriage wasn't such that it could handle that sort of pressure. And this is why it's a legit question to look at somebody's marriage when they're becoming an elder and say, well, our church is going to become like your wife. How's your wife doing? If you're a leader here, those things are all connected. They're not separable.
Ooh, that's good stuff, man. Was there anything else inside of the antitype? The anti-Cupid?
Well, I mean, I think this is one of those ones that I think it's so far it's so far away from our normal assumptions.
Yeah.
That it's actually a pretty difficult.
It was complicated. It was hard for me to read.
Yeah.
To try and really grasp it.
Yeah, because you've got his last paragraph that he writes, where he says 2 aspects of Venus are touched on here. In the second line, clearly she is the planetary deity who is influencing men and beasts to amorousness, to falling in love, to replenish the world.
Are you page 44?
Page 43.
Okay, yeah. I said that. Yeah, we talked about Plato too.
Right. Yeah. The first, however, expresses a less obvious and more audacious idea. To understand it, we must turn to Timaeus, which is my favorite of the Platonic dialogues, but nobody ever reads Timaeus, where Plato argues from the beauty of the cosmos that it was made from a pattern no less than eternal. Right. So Plato, he looks at the cosmos and says it fits together so well. It's the argument of, you still see this argument work really well for people. This is the one in that when Doug Wilson is arguing with Christopher Hitchens says, this is the fine tuning of the universe is the one that I don't have a good answer for yet. That's the hardest one to answer.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't expect a big bang to produce a fine-tuned universe, because it was the lack of tuning that caused the big bang. Otherwise, it would never bang.
Yeah.
Right? So, how does the lack of tuning result in perfect tuning? But this argument goes all the way back to Plato and the Timaeus. That he says, but the way Plato puts it is it must. Plato argues from the beauty of the cosmos that it was made from a pattern no less than eternal, right? So there must be some sort of eternal pattern that is impressing itself onto the cosmos, right? So this is where the entire cosmos then is a type of the eternal, right? And the eternal is the antitype, right? So it's the antitype of the eternal is impressed onto it. Now, what Plato didn't understand was that the eternal is a triune community of love, that is one God existing in 3 persons. That is the thing that's impressed onto the cosmos. is the triune community of love that is one God existing in three persons. Right? So that overflowing love of God is what we would expect to find impressed onto the universe, onto the cosmos everywhere. And then we're told to look to imitate it. Now, the first book that we're given is creation, and the second book that we're given is the scriptures.
Right.
But both of them are telling us the same thing. You can't find and discover the gospel in the first book, the good news about Jesus Christ in the first book. Although now, with history being a part of that first book, you actually you can actually run into Jesus long before you run into a Bible, because the book of creation and history is getting longer and longer, and has come to envelop certain aspects of the good news in it. But
keeps
the
having the
full,
keeps having
right. But the full and I mean that's when we're out of time, so we can't even go into the difference between this and the metaphysic of history that you have in the ancient world, where as history moves forward, things get worse and worse and worse and worse. Right now, because the church has actually adopted a pagan view of history, has adopted the pagan either cyclical view of history, which is called idealism, or it's adopted the view of history that the longer history goes on, the worse things get. We've adopted those pagan understandings and have moved away from a Trinitarian understanding, post-millennialism, and optimistic premillennialism, or the optimistic amillennialism that you're starting to see grow up more and more. Those are fully Trinitarian. But paganism produces pessimism about the future, because the further you get from the source, the less like the source you become. Right?
It's like telephone.
Yeah, it's like telephone. Paganism produces pessimism, but what you or all the cyclical views are fundamentally pessimistic as well. What you get with a Trinitarian understanding, where the Trinity is fundamentally revealed itself to creation through Christ, and Christ is fully revealed in the cross, resurrection, and ascension. What you get is a cyclical optimism, where there are cycles of death and resurrection, but they're cycles of death and resurrection that are moving us, that don't have to move away from the source more and more, because the eternal source of all things is the triune love of God overflowing, and you don't run out of that. You don't have less of that the more time goes on, right? So we're the kind of creature that need eternal love, both temporally eternal, as well as infinite, to be able to be satisfied by it. And so anything less than that, we're going to find unsatisfying. Well, so you find all of that functioning and working in a triune eschatology, and you lose all of that when you move away from either the Trinity or from the optimistic eschatology of the triune God has consistently given his people throughout history.
Whoa. That was an argument for post-millennialism I was not expecting.
But it's all in this poetic understanding of this poetic understanding of the world that Christendom had, that we have lost because we've become mechanistic. Because the longer you run a machine, the more it breaks down.
Right. All right. So what's next? Moving up to chapter 3.
What's the next? Yeah, Belphoebe, Amaret, and the Garden of Adonis. This is a really long chapter, if I remember.
It really is. Because I started reading it because the last chapter was so short. So I'm halfway through it already. But do you just want to take a section and just go kind of the ooh, the image of
I think
Eve, chapter 5.
we can take the section let's take the section to where he really starts to quote a lot of it. What was that 50? Yeah, on page 53 he starts to talk about the cosmic activity.
All right, so you want to go 53 to what?
We'll go up to the end of 55.
All right.
Talk about the fundamental connection between the cosmos and mankind's living active society.
Okay. Ugh, that's man. Bro, I did not okay, we'll stop there. Give me 1 second.